money talk. There's large breed organizations that have it in their best interest to create large numbers of horses, and they need a way to dispose of those large numbers of horses, and therefore they don't want the slaughter system to go away.
Domesticated livestock are responsible for the extinction of a large portion of the plants and animals on this earth.
We have the majority of land controlled by big corporations, some of which are multinational corporations, billion-dollar corporations. And those corporations say they need to run cattle on public land.
They're killing mustangs out in the wild. Why are they doing that? Why are they killing mustangs in the wild?
Welcome everyone to Action Hour for UnChained TV. I'm your host, Lindsay Baker, and today I am here with Carol Walker, who is a wild horse advocate. She's a published author, and she is here to talk to you today about what's going on with the roundups. Currently, there's some adoptions that are going to be available as well. Carol's going to talk about all of that. Carol, thank you for being here. Carol,
what so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm so revved up. What is happening with these roundups? Why are they happening? And just talk about that a little for folks that don't know anything about it.
Yes, so wild horses are on our public lands on almost 27 million acres. And the wild horses are being rounded up at a rate. Last year it was over 20,000 horses were removed from their homes on public lands, and the year before 22,000. We're told that the BLM's plan is to remove 100,000 wild horses from the wild in 5 years. And the main driving force behind this is livestock raising, sheep and cattle, mostly cattle, on public lands. The livestock owners have leases on these lands, and they see the horses as competition. The BLM doesn't even give statistics or studies on how the land is degraded by the livestock, but they go ahead and blame all of the land degradation on wild horses, which is ridiculous because there's probably about 65,000 wild horses left in the wild and over 1 million cattle on head of cattle using the land that the horses are on. Wild horses are supposed to be managed as the principal species in the areas that they are found, but that is just not happening. And we are going to see this year in Wyoming, the BLM has decided to zero out 2 herds entirely. And
zero, you mean to get rid of every single horse?
Every single horse.
And they have stated that publicly? That's in public record?
So they have a resource management plan that they have been working on, and they I wrote a protest letter, as did many other people. They've declined that letter. They've turned it down. And so there is currently a lawsuit that I'm going to be a plaintiff on to stop this from happening, because if it does go through, what's going to happen is the BLM is going to start zeroing out many other herds. So
let me ask you a question, just jump in here for a moment. I know it's a complex subject, but let's give the audience an idea of where this is happening in the country. Like, what are the states, all the states it's happening in, and then which are the key states that are right now, things are happening and heating up right now? Can you?
So 10 Western states have wild horses managed by the Bureau of Land Management on our public lands. And that would be California, Arizona, Nevada, Wyoming, Idaho, Colorado, hopefully Oregon, Washington. So it's 10 Western states. Nevada has the most wild horses, and Wyoming has the second most horses. Okay. And so the herd sizes range from a couple thousand horses down to very minimal levels that are allowed, like 60 horses, which isn't even genetically viable. So things are heating up, as I said, in Wyoming, probably this year. Nevada is always a hot spot. And last year we had some controversy over, were wild horses being removed because of an emergency drought, or was it just an excuse for removing wild horses? Wild horses are supposed to be removed if there are conditions that are threatening them, or and that wasn't the case in one herd in Colorado, the Piance herd, where the BLM said the horses were all starving to death, they needed to be removed, and then advocates went out there and took pictures of the horses right before the roundup, and the horses were fine, there was water, there was forage. So they tend to make up the rules as they go along, unfortunately.
Wow. Let's watch a clip about the BLM and how they get away with that.
The Bureau of Land Management says that it's a myth that wild horses are being sent to slaughter, and that they do not and have not sent wild horses in burros to slaughter. But a simple look beyond the BLM website brings to surface FOIA documents, grand jury investigations, GAO, and congressional reports that reveal just the opposite. A 1997 peer report indicates that the BLM obstructed legal evidence of their trafficking horses for the purpose of slaughter. A prior grand jury investigation of the BLM revealed evidence of black booking, otherwise known as phony double branding, where horses disappear without a paper trail, adoption proxies that enable large groups of horses to go to slaughter undetected, satellite ranches as off-record holding sites en route to slaughter, and so-called BLM sanctuaries set up as fronts for commercial exploitation. This grand jury investigation also focused on phantom herds of BLM wild horses being fraudulently subsidized at the Bartlesville, Oklahoma holding facility.
What we know about is very, very bad, in my view. And what we don't know about is far worse.
So in 2019,
Well, let me just cut in there for a moment. I want to say that clip was from Saving America's Wild Horses. It's available on UnChained TV, and we want to give them credit for that clip. Go ahead.
So in 2019, the BLM made a change to their adoption program, and they instituted what is called the Adoption Incentive Program. And what that is when you adopt a wild horse, you can apply to get $1,000 from the BLM. And the original program, they were going to give $500 after 2 months to the person adopting, and then after 2 months after the year was up, they would get the other $500. And each person was allowed to take 4 horses, up to 4 horses. So what immediately, the minute this program was instituted, you know, I and many others were horrified because we saw there was an opportunity for terrible abuse. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. American Wild Horse Campaign did a big investigation into this. There were sanctuaries involved as well who were ending up taking these horses out of kill pens. So people were dumping the horses after they've received their money, and then they get an additional fee for selling them at auction. This one family had made $22,000 doing this. And so the BLM then said, well, we can revise the program. So they basically just changed it a little bit, saying that people will get the money at the end, all the money. Mm-hmm. And they raised the adoption fee from $25 to $125. But this hasn't made any sort of difference. So there's a lawsuit going on right now that the American Wild Horse Campaign, Animal Welfare Institute, and Skydog Sanctuary are bringing against the BLM to stop this program, because it's just leading to people randomly adopting horses and then dumping them afterward. And I went to an adoption in Rock Springs, and I have been to Rock Springs, Wyoming for their adoptions many times before. There was a line of trucks waiting, and all these people lined up to take horses. And I was shocked. I was like, this is not good for the horses. These people don't really even care about the horses, most of them. They just want their money. And it was it was stunning to me. People walked in, they didn't even look at the horses, and they applied to take them. It's a very, very bad situation, and it needs to be ended. Our horses need to be protected.
Let's talk a little bit about what happens to the horses in the holding pens, and what is strangulus?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So there was a huge roundup in Wyoming where almost 3,500 horses were removed in 2020, 2021, and the beginning of 2022. And 2,700 horses were sent to a huge new facility in Wheatland, Wyoming. The first adoption event was supposed to be in March 2022, and I was going to go, and they canceled it due to strangles. So it's streptococcus. I don't remember the second scientific word for it, but it's a highly infectious disease. Horses can die from it. And there's swelling in the neck and throat area, and fluids, and they basically usually don't treat it. They just let it run through the facility, which is what they have done. And those 2,700 horses, there are now 300 foals that were born. So there's about 3,000 horses there. No one has been able to see since the roundup. And I have been in contact with the head of that field office, and they said they will let people in once strangles is over, because they're concerned about people bringing it to their own horses if they go into the facility. So what happened last year is that they actually showed pictures of each of the pens, and they promised me that as soon as the facility was strangles free, they'd have a public event allowing the public to go in and see the horses at the facility. This still has not happened. And here it is, February. And they have an adoption event on the schedule for April. And I don't know if it's going to happen or not. The other facility that had illness was in Canon City, Colorado last year. You probably heard about it. 150 horses died in a 2-month period. And they found a flu variant, also some bacterial infection as well. And one of my least favorite things that I learned was that they were moving dead bodies of wild horses with the same front loader that they were using to feed the horses from. So they stopped doing that. But I mean, it seems like they don't really care. And the Canon City facility used to be one of the best facilities in the country, short-term holding facility for horses. But when I adopted my horse Helios, who had been rounded up in 2020 and who had been fat and happy when he came in, was skin and bones after I got him. And clearly some of these horses were starving and they weren't being fed properly. And there were some mares who had been nursing, some mares that weren't nursing, that were emaciated. And the care in those facilities can be terrible. And the fact that they don't let the public in means, yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Before you go on,
there's no oversight.
There's no oversight.
All these people.
Before we go too much further, talk a little bit about how people can get involved to stop the roundups. So we're going to get back to talking about the adoptions, but I want to make sure before, if we miss anyone, let's talk a little bit about what can be done and what's going on with that a little. And let me share the screen, and you can tell us a little bit about what it is exactly.
It's that green Participate Now button. So currently there is a herd called the McCullough Peaks herd, and it's one of the most beloved herds in the country. It's near Cody, Wyoming. And the BLM released what's called a scoping notice to say what their plans were for rounding up this herd. What's really sad is that this herd has been the poster child for the use of birth control. For many, many years, the BLM has said, this herd, we're managing them using birth control, and we won't have to do roundups. But now they're talking about removing 2/3 of the herd
So let's talk a little bit about what this form is specifically and what people.
Okay, so the form, so I just wanted to tell you about the McCullough Peaks herd. So this form allows you, if you push the green button, it allows you to submit comments. And the comments the comment period ends February 7th. So we've been trying to get as many people as possible to comment against this plan and to keep the McCullough Peaks wild horses where they are, manage them humanely, and not remove them. It's also an aging herd. Because birth control has been used, there are a lot of older horses in the herd who really aren't contributing to the numbers of horses that are born. So we really want to preserve this herd. Wild horses are always safer in the wild. They're always safer where they live. They're not safe once they are in these holding facilities. They can get sick, they can die, they can be shipped off. And so we want to keep the herd there. And I understand you're going to be putting up the link so people can find out about how to make comments and how to submit them. Because
I want to say that all of the links will be at the top of the post here. This was the link to write a letter, correct? I want to clarify what we're showing. We're going a little too fast. I want to clarify. So this is a link where what can people do with this particular link? How do they use it? Because a lot of people are not familiar.
So there will be a link to my blog post, which gives you talking points, and then a link to where you can hit the participate now button and just write in your comments. You don't have to submit a letter. You can just write the comments right then and there.
So you don't really need to go to this link is what I'm asking.
No, yes, you do. That's where you put your comments on.
Okay, so then they would go first to your website to
blog post to give some suggestions about what to say. And then in the blog post, there's also a link to that form where they can submit them.
Yeah. Okay. While you keep going, I'm going to try to bring that up on the screen. So go ahead. Just I will be interrupting, so just be ready. Okay, go ahead.
So even if the BLM makes a decision that we don't like or makes a decision against the horses, it's very important to comment. Because if you don't comment, if people don't comment, if there isn't interest, the BLM will say, we're going ahead, everybody's okay with what we're doing. So I send out alerts to people and let them know how they can comment. So this is a very important form of participation. Yeah. Also, there are times where you might want to send a letter to your elected officials, to your senators and representatives, to your governor. Last year with the Sandwash Roundup, or a year and a half ago with the Sandwash Roundup, our governor Polis got involved. And it was because of all of the public coming and contacting them and asking them to do something to help the horses. So right now, the most important thing you can do is to contact people and let them know how you feel, that you feel it's important that the horses stay on their public lands and that they are managed humanely. Another issue that's been coming up is the use of birth control that is not humane. So spaying wild mares, never should that be an option. It's torture and it's very dangerous and it can kill the mare. And there's no reason for it at all. Gonacon is a drug that can be used for birth control, but it sterilizes the mare within two doses. So there are but there is birth control that works, that's reversible. And that if there's a need for birth control, that's really the only one that we think should be used.
You advocate.
Some herds are too small. Gus Cothran, who's the leading geneticist on wild horses, says we need at least 150 adults in a population to be able to sustain genetic viability. So if you have a herd,
let's stop there for a moment and talk a little bit about the herds and how, when these roundups happen, how they really gut the herds. And not only do the horses that get taken are victims of this horrific thing, but their families are broken. And what happens to the horses left behind, particularly the foals and the younger horses? And can you talk a little bit about the familiar structure and how much this unpacks in it? Because I don't know if people know that.
So wild horses live in families. It's not the same as like domestic horses out in a pasture. Sometimes the mares and the stallions have been together for over a decade. So there's usually one stallion. Sometimes there can be two, who's in charge, and he protects the family. And then there's mares, and there usually is a lead mare who knows where all the water holes are, where the good grazing is, and she might lead the group. And then there's the youngsters in the family. And usually the fillies will stay until 2 or 3, and when they have their first estrus, and then they leave and find their own families. And then the colts are usually kicked out around 2 or 3 by the stallion, who doesn't want to see them as a threat. So, but sometimes the families will have other families that they like to hang around with and associate with. And it's a really wonderful structure. And when you have a roundup, you see all of these horses are separated from each other. And the stallions, if you've spent time on the range with wild horses, the stallions live for their families. And when the older stallions get kicked out by young ones and they go off on their own, they usually don't live very long. And to see these horses who are magnificent and beautiful and thriving in the wild in these dirty pens, without their families, without their family members, with the light gone out of their eyes, it is the saddest thing I have ever seen.
What is would you say, how long are these horses in these actual pens before they go the adoption process?
So you just showed a picture of Rock Springs holding facility, and that facility actually does open to the public quite frequently. Usually if there's a roundup in the fall, in the early spring, they'll have their first adoption. And but not all the horses are adopted. And the older horses aren't even offered for adoption now. They used to allow people to adopt any horse at the facility. They don't do that anymore. They say, okay, these are the 50 you can look at. And they're usually younger horses, because younger horses are more likely to get adopted. The old horses can be there for years. And then they can get shipped off to long-term, what the BLM calls pastures, but half of them are feedlots. And they just live out their lives. So the mares go to one area, and then the former stallions, which are now geldings, go to different areas. So there's never an opportunity for a family anymore after the horses are rounded up. And you only see maybe 3,000 horses adopted a year. And if they bring in 22,000, then you have this increasing number in holding. And right now in holding, there's over 65,000 wild horses.
Oh my goodness.
And what we're really afraid of is that they're going to say it's so expensive to keep these horses in holding, we really just need to euthanize them all.
Wow. Let's watch another clip on that.
Whether adopted as pets, used for trail riding, rodeo, horse tripping, or even wild horse racing, many wind up at the auctions where they're sold loose and they go straight to slaughter.
She called the horse trader and said, just come take him out of here. I don't want him.
Show horses, rodeo horses, race horses, trail horses, burros, wild horses, and the list goes on.
So really, it's not just the wild horses that are being sent to slaughter. It's actually become a business, a multi-million-dollar business, corrupt business that's going on. So do you feel like the BLM and the cattle interests are sort of working in coordination with these other interests? Or are they all one big group? Like, what is the structure of this mega thing that's going on that seems so hard to penetrate, would you say?
Well, I don't know that I see it as a big thing, but we have the livestock lobby is one of the strongest in Congress. So they have the power in Congress to say, you know, we want these horses gone. We want them off our public lands. We see them as competition. And we can lobby directly, but we don't have the money and the power behind these people that is behind these people.
Right.
And that's what's made it so difficult to fight. And then the Secretary of the Interior that we have now, Deb Haaland, we had such high hopes for because she was a wild horse supporter in Congress. But she has declined to even say the word wild horse. She hasn't met with any of the advocacy groups. And she clearly is on board with letting the BLM proceed with their plan of extinction for our wild horses.
I see. I want to show now the BLM website, and maybe we could talk a little bit about that here for you. So if people want to find out a little bit more about adopting or everything that's going, actually, they can also come here and get a lot of information, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I can walk you through what happens with an adoption. So basically you have to fill out a form saying that you have the correct facility for the horses. They have height of fences, what you need to have to adopt a wild horse. And then you can go to an adoption event. And there's a list of adoption events. There's online adoption events. There's in-person adoption events. A lot of this was closed down during COVID, but right now they're opening things up. So for instance, Canon City had no in-person adoption events last year, but now they're having one once a month. And Wheatland, as I said, still has not opened up, but some of the facilities have in-person adoptions where you can go see the horses and adopt them. And you can also fill out a form to get your adoption incentive. The other issue that we had talked about, Lindsay, just this morning was sale authority. So sale authority is horses that are over 10 or have failed to be adopted at 3 events can be sold without limitation. Wow. That means that the person who purchases them can get title to them immediately. And they can also buy truckloads of horses if they apply to the BLM in DC. And what happens is you can have people who immediately turn around and just sell them to at a slaughter auction. So there's no protection for these horses at all. When you adopt a horse, you don't get title until a year and 2 months after you have adopted the horse. So they see that as protection because you're not going to want to feed the horse for that long if you're going to turn around and sell it. But the problem is the adoption incentive program makes it much more likely that people are going to, sell the horse and take the money and run.
Right. Before, believe it or not, we're halfway through the show and more. I want to go to your website now and talk a little bit about, for one thing, how people can go ahead and take the steps, but also a badge on here. And I want to also tell people before I forget, these are all your own images and they are for sale and they're amazing. And we'll talk about the 2 places to get them. But walk us around your website a little. What are the important parts you want people to know about, if you will?
So the blog would be the important part, to find out about action alerts, what people can do to help the horses. And so you can actually sign up to get notifications when I have a new blog post. And I do try to give as much information to people as possible about how they can help the horses. I'll give talking points for how they can do comments. I'll tell people who to call, who to contact, and how to help the horses. So that's, and then I also have my books available for sale on my website. And I have a new book, Blue Zeus, Legend of the Red Desert, that just came out in March last year. And people can purchase the books. I have 4 books.
Where would I find the book so I can show the cover?
Products.
There we go.
Scroll down, and there it is on the right.
Blue Zoos. Wow. And what are the other books we have? We have a calendar, beautiful images of calendars.
I have, so the other books are Galloping to Freedom. It's about the Adobe Town horses that were rescued and taken to Black Hills Wild Horse Sanctuary. Wild Hoofbeats is my first book, which is about the Adobe Town wild horses. And then I have a how-to of horse photography as well.
How-to horse photography. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So just scroll down a little bit, you'll see it. There it is, horse photography. So I used to do talks about how to photograph horses. And so I did a book that's a how-to, and it even has a chapter about photographing wild horses. And it tells you tips and tricks about how to do that, how to get the best pictures of wild horses and domestic horses as well.
Well, you certainly are a great example of getting amazing pictures and images. Your work is just incredible. And
thank you.
Let people know we're going to put up the links where they can find you and your work. So, Carol, let's talk about one more thing. I want to talk about two. The horses, how important they are to the ecology of the environment in the Western states and how it affects the globe. Also, that they were supposed to be protected, and because they're not considered endangered species. I have a short clip. Let me have you comment.
Wild horses go to slaughter than are actually being reported. They've been going north and south in huge numbers.
They originated on this continent. You know, these as a species, they predate us by over 50 million years.
If the wild horse were considered a native species, which of course they are, then they would be considered for the endangered species list.
U.S. horses, whether used for racing, showing, competition, sport, breeding, recreation, or work, are treated with many substances which are known to be toxic to humans.
Why would we send that meat to unsuspecting children?
We're talking about taking animals that have been treated with prohibited drugs and slaughtering them for food.
We're putting economic development before the serious health of people that are going to be eating these animals.
When you understand that some of the drugs involved can cause lethal effects if they're ingested by people, they can kill people, it becomes an issue of tremendous professional liability.
So there's actually two different things here.
Yeah, I just
There's the 1971 Act, which protects wild horses, and that's separate from the Endangered Species Act. That's two different things.
Okay.
So the 1971 Act is not predicated on needing to prove that the horses are native. So it was an act that was enacted. The 1971 Wild Horse and Burro Act was enacted to protect wild horses and to manage them where they are currently found in the United States. So the problem isn't the act. The problem is how it's being used and how it's being administered. BLM was set up, the Bureau of Land Management, as the entity to manage the horses, which was a huge mistake because it's like hiring the fox to manage the hen house. You have the Taylor Grazing Act started the Bureau of Land Management, and it was basically to manage lands, and it was set up for the ranchers. It was set up for the livestock owners. It wasn't set up for the purpose of preserving wild horses. You know, if I had my way, we would have a completely separate organization managing wild horses who had wild horses' interests at heart. We don't have that. So we need to strengthen that act, and we need to deal with how the BLM is twisting it and misusing it. And then the Endangered Species Act. So if we could prove that wild horses actually did not die out on this continent and are not just a returned native species, then we would have a little more leverage with certain groups. But Interestingly, the Sierra Club, who used to be very against wild horses, is now very supportive. The Audubon Society is very against wild horses. So if we could say we can prove that these horses are native and have stayed here rather than being returned, then it would help. But the 1971 Act should be protecting wild horses, says they should be managed as a principal species where they're found, and they're not.
So is that one of the things that people should mention when they write to?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Can you give us a little quick synopsis, a couple of sentences of what would be good so they know? Like, what are the main talking points? Just key points would work too. Bullet points.
Well, the horses are a contribution to our country. And Richard Nixon said that at the time the act was passed, and that wild horses are a part of our culture, of our heritage, and that they are protected under this act, which you know.
So they should mention the act. And what other aspects?
They mention the act. What they can also mention is, as far as, remember when I mentioned genetic viability, these herds need to be managed so that the horses are genetically viable. If you bring a herd down to 70 horses, which is what they're trying to do in McCullough Peaks, they won't be genetically viable. They'll start to have, they'll have all of the issues with inbreeding, and the herd will stop being a healthy herd. And the numbers that the horses are at are so small. I think the horses, they say that there's 179 horses in that herd right now, and there's a 2% growth rate, which is very low. And they're worried about 39 horses over their projected number. It's insane. And the other issue with BLM, when they plan to remove horses, they never consider what is going to happen to these horses after they're rounded up. During the roundup, a lot of horses die. They break their necks running into panels. They panic. They colic. And horses have supposedly pre-existing conditions like club feet. Those horses are instantly put down. If there's a horse that's blind, even though they may have in their family, they have been taken care of and they're fine in the wild, they're immediately put down. So there's a lot of horses that die. Horses get sick in holding facilities. And then if they're adopted by an unscrupulous person, they can end up at slaughter. So the horses are safer in the wild. That's where they belong.
And one more thing I want to add, talking about safety, human safety. In that last clip, we kind of jumped past it, but they were talking about human consumption of horse meat, which is very bad for human beings. And so this is creeping into the food system. And people say, well, people are starving. You want to address that, but people say, well, we need food, in some of these countries, so the horse meat is okay. Let's just talk about why horse meat is bad.
Europe is not accepting horse meat from the US anymore.
Thankful.
So like bute is a carcinogen. Bute is a painkiller for horses and used commonly in domestic horses. But the wild horses also, even the wild horses that have just been adopted, they've been vaccinated. They've had vaccinations. So that's in their bloodstream, that's in their bodies. So even the wild horses are not safe to consume. And people have never traditionally eaten horse meat in this country. Horses have been our partners and our friends and our companions, and they work with us in competition, in daily activities, and they are not for human consumption. So yes, and the idea that you can control the population of wild horses by sending them to slaughter is not something that Americans approve of. We want to see the horses remain free. We want to have that tonic of wildness in our lives. We want them to be wild and free. And I encourage everyone, if you have an opportunity, to get out there and see these horses in the wild. There's nothing at all like it. And you can call up on Google, you can say BLM, wild horses, pick a state that has wild horses in it, and there'll be the herds listed, and you can find out where to go. And there's Facebook groups on a lot of these herds, especially the popular ones, where you can find out where to go. And there's some areas that have people who will take you out on a tour and see them. And I can tell you, there's nothing like it. It's such a peaceful thing sitting with a family of wild horses. It is my favorite thing on earth to do. And the horses always know that I'm there. They don't forget I'm there. But if I sit down and watch quietly, they'll go about their normal daily activities. They'll go to the water hole and drink. The mares will nurse. The horses will, they like to do mutual grooming, where two horses line up so that they can scratch each other's backs and necks. And the foals will play. And it's a beautiful, wonderful, peaceful sight. And these horses are so well suited to where they live. They live in areas with some of the poorest conditions, out in the high desert, where you say, oh my gosh, how are they living out there? But they're fat and happy, and they are doing just fine. So my main cause is to let people know that these horses belong to the American people. They belong to us, and they need to remain wild and free where they are. And we need to fight for them. And when I started in 2004, there weren't very many people who were working on this. But now, because of social media and because of spreading the word, there are thousands and thousands of people who care about these horses and are willing to speak up and do something about this, which is a good thing. I don't want people to walk around going, oh, it's just so depressing, I can't even deal with it.
Right.
Because, I truly believe we are going to have an opportunity for change this year. And we just have to hang in there and keep doing what we can to let people know what's going on. And that's why I wanted to be on the show with you, so that more people can find out about wild horses.
Absolutely. And everyone that's watching can help by sharing out this video. If you have not yet downloaded, please go to UnChainedTV.com and you can see this broadcast, share it with your friends, show your mom, show your uncle, show your friends, have them come on, download the app and Unchained TV. And you will get so much information there. Carol, we are just about out of time. And I just would like to give you the floor for a moment. Oh, I seem to have been gone off screen. That's okay. I'm going to just give you the floor for one more minute before we go off. Anything you'd like our audience to know? Go ahead.
Okay. So, as I mentioned, wild horses are doing great out on our public lands. And what people can do to help is to let other people know about them. Let people know how wonderful, how beautiful they are, how they enhance our public lands. They are not a detraction, and they deserve to live wild and free. And they are our heritage. And I would like to be able to see wild horses continuing for generations to come, so that other people can see them and care about them. And, adoption is not the answer. There aren't enough people to adopt all of these horses. What we need to do is stop the roundups. Just stop them right now and come up with other solutions. If the herds need to be managed for keeping the numbers down, then there are humane ways of doing that. But we need to keep our wild horses on our public lands. And I find that my photographs let people know that these horses are doing great.